our whole system is different. Our whole system isn't, study so you can take the test. It's do it every day until you get 100% twice in a row. Then you know that you know that you know it.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. You know, they say when you get older, time goes by so much faster. And I know that you are so much older now that you're 60. You just turned 60.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, time is relative because it is a percentage of the total.
Oh, okay.
So when you think about it, 1 year when you're 3 years old is 1/3 of your entire life.
Oh, 'tis true.
So when you say it's a year until you'll be 4, it's eternity.
Right.
But when you're 60, 1 year is only 1/60th of your life.
True.
Therefore, it's only going to be a very quick time until you are 61. Plus, if we're busy, time goes quickly. What is the saying? The hours are long, but the days are short. I think so many people do experience that. But why do you mention how fast time goes now that I'm old?
Well, true confessions, you're only less than a year older than me, so you're not that much older than me. But we're recording an Ask Andrew Anything podcast, and that means we're on the 10th episode. And I thought...
We've done more than 10.
Well, yes, that's the whole thing. We have done 220. We're at episode 220, and it really just feels like we just restarted our podcast series again with episode 200, which was the video Ask Andrew Anything, which was very fun because we featured the students.
You had the kids in there, yeah.
Yeah, the structure and style for students. Students were in there asking you all the hard questions, and their parents were asking you easy questions or something like that. So I have a bunch of questions for you, boss.
All right. Well, I hope they're good ones.
Well, of course they are. They're very good. Let's start with Betty. Betty says, my teenager and I are frequently at odds, and he really needs someone else to teach him. Sounds like he's exactly the age that he's supposed to be. Unfortunately, our budget will not allow for a tutor. Will your SSS video courses be comprehensive enough for him to learn from so that we can alleviate some of the headbutting?
That's an easy answer. Yes, absolutely. And, one of the things that I have found people tell me over the years, and this was before we have the new SSS, which is so much more comprehensive, but we just had the SWI and then the continuation course. I've had so many people tell me that it allowed their child to learn from the video directly, and it created a better relationship because then they could, rather than having to kind of be the person teaching and enforcing.
Kind of like the 3 branches of government all in one.
they could come over and be helpful to the student. And then I, on the video, was doing the direct instruction, the giving the assignment, the laying down of the law.
Right.
So, yes, I think it is a great option. Very often, well, we've all had this experience as parents. We say something to our kids 10 times. They don't believe it. They don't hear it. They don't do it. And then some other adult says the same thing we said one time. And the kid's like, well, Mr. Smith said, and then boom, he believes it. We're like,
right, exactly.
Okay, you didn't hear me say that 10 times? So there is that benefit of kind of having, the third person, the outside authority, and that can be accomplished, in many ways. Sometimes there's a book that's written directly to the student and the book have a relationship. That's a hard one to pull off.
Yeah.
Another option is you can't do a tutor, but maybe there's an online class. and you can have external accountability there. And then, of course, the option of the video is almost as good in that way. So I think this would definitely, in fact, I have actually had people say to me, I know this might be exaggeration on their part, your writing videos saved our homeschool.
Yeah.
I was about to give up.
Yep.
So.
Yep. There you go, Betty.
All right.
Okay, this one is a technical question about our writing, how we teach writing. Okay, and this, but actually it's I'll ask a question.
Okay.
Liz wants to know, besides the foundational units 1 and 2, what do you think is the most valuable structural model?
Well, part of the power of the whole is in its parts. And I wouldn't go so far as to say an analogy of a car, what's the most important part, because if you take out any of the important parts, it won't be a car anymore. That's maybe a stretch. But certainly part of the brilliance of the system as Webster developed it over the years was the increasing complexity of the questions that are asked. So Unit 1 and 2, the question is so easy you almost don't notice you're asking a question. What are the keywords in a sentence? But it's still a question. Unit 3, the questions get a little tougher. What are the key elements of the story? Unit 4 requires some discernment, some judgment. What are the most interesting, important, or relevant facts to extract and summarize from? Unit 5, that can be a real challenge, although for a lot of people it's a breakthrough because there's no text and there's just pictures, and you've got to develop the ability to have kind of a litany of questions you can use. Unit 6, not just what are the most interesting, important, or relevant facts, but what's a logical sequencing of those. And then Unit 7 is the blank page. So it would be very tempting to say, well, Unit 7, because when you go out in the real world, or if you go take a standardized test, or if you have to write something and all you have available is you and your mind and what you carry around in it, that Unit 7 model is where you need to be. And I know some teachers have been very tempted to start at Unit 1 and 2 and then quickly jump to Unit 7 because, well, we've got to prepare the kids for the state tests.
Right.
Unit 7 and 8 are closely related. In terms of the model, Unit 8 is kind of the culmination or I don't know, the integration. So on one side, you're learning how to collect up, organize, and present facts. On the other side, you're learning how to ask increasingly challenging questions. In Unit 8, you have to have facts and support that with your own thoughts or vice versa. So certainly while Unit 7 and 8 are kind of the target, and then Unit 9 is just, denouement, frosting on the cake.
Right.
I would love to encourage everyone not to cherry pick, but to trust the system. Work through the 9 units, even if you only have time to do a week or two on Unit 5. It's better to have done a little bit and then move on than to skip it entirely. And I've learned that the hard way over the years.
We have done a series of podcasts on each of the different units 1 and 2, 3. We'll put some links in the show notes so that if any of our listeners are not familiar with our structural models, well, you should be.
You can be.
But if you're not, you can be.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other part of structure and style, of course, is style. So I have a style question.
Okay, good.
And this is from Marcy. She asks, what is Andrew's favorite dress-up? And then let me just elaborate a little bit. The answer I heard him give in a podcast was different than the answer I heard in a video course that you had done in the past. Are dress-ups kind of like children? His favorite depends on what day it is?
Well, let me describe for you my breakfasts, since no one has asked, what does Andrew eat for breakfast?
Yes.
So almost every day when I get up early enough and have time, I peel and chop some garlic, and then hopefully I have some asparagus. So then I chop 2 or 3 stalks of asparagus, pretty small, And then I get some olives, usually some garlic or jalapeno stuffed olives, and I chop those. If I have some cilantro, and I put that in the skillet and saute it up a little bit. If I have some leftover meat, like some leftover steak or lamb or chicken or even hamburger, I'll put a little bit of that in, saute that up. And then I take it out of the skillet and I put in 2 eggs. And then I fry the eggs sunny side up, but not too cooked because you put the sauteed vegetable meat mixture on top of that. And then I melt the Parmesan cheese on top of all that. Depending on my mood, I might go with fresh habaneros chopped into the mixture or some very hot sauce. And that's what I eat pretty much every morning that I have time.
Sounds pretty elaborate.
It is elaborate.
A lot of interesting flavors there.
It takes the time, but sometimes I'm out of an ingredient. I'm missing something. There's no asparagus. So I have to look, is there any other vegetable I would be willing to substitute? Or maybe just no, I'm not. I will not put green bell peppers where asparagus should be.
Or eggplant.
Eggplant is not even a vegetable. But what I think about the style techniques now is that they work best when they're balanced. You don't want too many ly words, just like you don't want too much garlic. You don't want too many clauses. You just like a balance of these things. And I didn't come up with the perfect balance of this particular breakfast meal the first time. Every day I do it, I get a little bit better at just judging the ingredients, the time for cooking. It's really getting close to perfection. And I would compare that with the style techniques, is that, you could say, yes, the garlic is my favorite, but what's the point? You could say, well, the olives, no, if anything's missing, it's just not quite the same. And so when you create a paragraph that has judiciously, appropriately used dress-up techniques, maintains a variety of sentence openers, and then if you're in a unit where you want to have, a topic clincher, maybe you have a decoration, that is like crafting the perfect breakfast. And you can do it again and again and again and discover that, yes, the ingredients are what make the whole.
Great. Sounds delicious. What time's breakfast?
Well, if you ever really want to come over, tell me in advance so I can not put the habaneros in the mixture.
This is true, because I would cry and only taste the habaneros. Okay, I have a question. This one might take a little bit longer for you to answer, but it's an exciting question. Samantha asks, I'm an accidental homeschooler, and I have considered homeschooling in the past, and I know it's ultimately what will be best for my children long term, which is, in some cases, children, that's maybe best for them. In other cases, it won't. So in Samantha's case, she's discerned that maybe homeschooling would be the best for her children. Then she says, but I am scared I am not going to teach them enough or that I'm going to teach them the wrong things. How do I know what to teach my children? You're already homeschooling, Samantha, if you're asking that question, because every homeschool mom and dad asks that question.
The first thing, and I think most people who've been homeschooling for a long time would answer is, the first thing is, you're not jumping in this pool and can't get out if you don't want to. This is not a permanent commitment. You can take it year by year. And a lot of people have discovered that, if they have several children, there's a time when they would put one child in school for a year or two or more, whereas they wouldn't the others. So it's not an all or nothing deal. But the most important thing is just go 1 year at a time and just say, you know what, we'll try this year. And if this year goes decently well, we'll figure out next year. And that's how a lot of people do end up homeschooling, for all
12 years.
10, 12 years, is not by committing to the whole thing as if there's no other option after you decide, but is commit to what you can reasonably handle psychologically. I would actually, though, flip this question back on
Samantha.
Samantha. I would be afraid of what my children might not learn if they went to a school. I would be afraid, will the school be able to meet their needs as individuals? Will the school be able to provide for them the right priorities of instruction? You know, we've talked in the past about character, knowledge, and skills, and that some of those intangibles, as Mrs. Ingham would talk about them, the things that are the real human things you take into adulthood, more than the facts you learned or the math level you got to, are who you are as a person. Those character elements are actually so much more likely to be developable in a home environment. I just saw yesterday on CNN, right, a major news website, an article, many kids are happier now, and it had a whole bunch of different quotes. My kids, you know, they're playing with their siblings. They didn't used to have time to do that. You know, they have the freedom to do projects. We used to be so busy. It was go to school, do the homework, go to, you know, ballet, come home day after day.
Right.
And so there's a certain leisure that many children are experiencing now accidentally, which many homeschoolers discovered along the way. And of course, one of the, I guess, completely ironic word origins is the word school.
Yes.
Which is from the Greek skole, which means
leisure.
Study, right, is from the Latin studium, which means zeal.
Oh, okay.
Right? So we don't normally think about zeal and leisure as the byproducts of going to school.
Right.
But very often what we discover homeschooling, either because of a special needs or because of special circumstance in the world, is that those two things are much more possible and that they're actually nurturing the soul, developing the character, working on the intangibles. And the academics will take care of itself. And I'll just guarantee, Samantha, was it? There's no teacher in any school who covers all the bases.
It's true. I taught school for a couple years, and here's a secret, and I know every school teacher would say that this is true. We can't cover everything that the books tell us to cover every year. Just there are things that happen. And so we don't finish the entire school year.
So
but yet somehow those kids get promoted to the next grade.
So if you don't do everything that you think you're supposed to do, that's just kind of normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I would just want to point you, Samantha, to a couple of talks that Andrew has given. One is Cultivating Language Arts, preschool through high school, just to kind of get a perspective of what it could look like, depending on how old your children are. But then we did a we did a webinar together of 2 accidental homeschoolers. And so we'll put a link in the show notes to that. And I think a lot of the focus of that particular webinar was, hey, this is only for a season, but redeem the time. This is a great time to get outdoors, to try something new, like cooking.
It's funny. I sometimes tell the story of how my parents had this habit of kind of drilling, when drilling was not an evil word, of just practicing things like spelling words and math facts whenever they were around, on the car, on the boat we had. I remember specifically helping my mother cook and her running spelling words verbally, and I would just practice spelling words that were on the spelling list. And, that kind of organic, integrated home, practical, plus the things you need to learn in terms of, language and math, that can happen throughout the fabric of the time. Rather than in isolated, disintegrated little chunks that often kids experience.
Well, we could just talk for hours and hours
But you
about
have
this,
more questions.
But I do have more questions.
All right. Well, what's another one?
Okay, so this is about one of our products. Jane asks, how is the Phonetic Zoo different from other programs, and is spelling important?
Well, certainly there's been a big shift from, say, 100 years ago when everyone believed that spelling was very important to the argument now, well, everybody has spell checkers and computers, and you don't really even have to write on paper. You can just talk to your machines, and spelling is not nearly as important, or maybe it isn't at all. So, those are kind of the extremes of opinion, and usually the balance is in the middle. There certainly are some people who are, very dyslexic or dysgraphic. It's really hard for them to learn, and they will grow up and become adults who are not perfect spellers. There's also other kids who are going to see a spelling bee, sign me up, right? And love the challenge of that. So, children are all individuals, and I certainly wouldn't give up on teaching spelling. But there are different approaches. And that's a question I love to answer because our program really is very, very different than anything else out there because it's an auditory approach rather than a paper-based visual workbook type of approach. And one of the things I've pointed out, and go into great detail in my talk, Spelling in the Brain, is that spelling is a sequential activity. To spell a word right, you have to get all the letters, but you also have to get them in the right order.
Exactly, yep.
And other than mixing up some vowels here and there, that's probably one of the biggest challenges is the right order for all the letters. So when you see a word and you're looking at it, there's no sequential storage of that information. It kind of goes into your brain all at once. There's a global, a spatial, an image-based storage. But if there's any kind of visual processing challenge, that image can get a bit scrambled on the way in.
Right.
And if it gets scrambled on the way in, you can be sure it'll be scrambled on the way out. With our approach, because it's auditory, the kids hear the word, hear it in a sentence, hear the word, and they try to write the word. Then the real power of the program is where the word is being spelled out loud, one letter at a time.
By you and by
me,
Dr. Webster.
And Dr. Webster on audio. And the child then compares what they hear with what they wrote. So the self-correcting mechanism really is an auditory input, which by its nature is sequential. If I spell a word for you, I have to say it one letter at a time.
Yes.
Right? There's no other way. Now, some kids are a very small number of kids may be more auditorily confused than they are visually. But those are our beloved kinesthetic learners.
Yes.
But for a lot of children, this auditory input is a completely different experience. The other approach is, when we were in school, I don't know if you had the same system, but they give you a list on Monday, and then you're supposed to, quote, study it, and then you take the pretest on Thursday, and if you get 90% on the pretest, you get an A, and you don't have to take the Friday test. But if you don't, then you go study some more, and then you take the test on Friday. Only nobody ever said, how do you study, right? So for a lot of people, they think, well, if I just stare at it for a while, right? Well, that doesn't work. I had the benefit of, like I said earlier, a mother who somehow got this list and would actually do this kind of verbal auditory practice method. And I remember taking the test. I knew that I knew the word, but I kind of had to say it to myself one letter at a time, and get it on the paper. And so I could usually always get 100%. Without her, I don't know what I would have done because I don't remember the teachers ever giving you a method of studying. Now, I've seen some schools where they say to the kids, write the word 10 times and then you take a test or whatever. Our whole system is different. Our whole system isn't, study so you can take the test. It's do it every day until you get 100% twice in a row. Then you know that you know that you know it.
Right.
And whether it takes you 4 days or 14 days, it doesn't really matter. You will get 100%. So it's kind of like, a guaranteed success method. So it works particularly well for kids who have felt that they couldn't learn to spell in some other system because it's just a completely different approach. And as with everything, we have a 100% satisfaction guarantee. If it isn't working, just send it back and try something else.
Right. Good. Okay. I'm a little concerned that we're going to go over today, but these last two questions that I have for you are so good.
Well, people can just turn it off whenever they want to, right?
This is true.
No captive audience here.
No, well, but, it's got to last as long as my 30-minute walk in the morning.
Oh, okay.
Then, so that's,
And
now
no
you
longer.
know.
All right.
Now
so
you
what's
know.
what's the next great question?
Okay, this question comes from Amanda, and I think she probably had listened to your talk or our podcast on the 4 deadly errors of teaching writing. We just had that not too long ago. And her question ultimately is, how do I know if I'm truly withholding help? But let me give you the background story. Okay? She says, hello, Mr. Pudewa and Mrs. Walker. Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I'm enjoying your current podcast series, but it leads me to a challenging questions. I will preface the question with 2 critical points. 1, I have amazing parents. 2, I am an only child. As a child, I received tons of help. Papers were written for me. The only science fair project I ever submitted was done for me. I didn't understand it then and only slightly understand it now. Incidentally, it was about anesthesia drugs because that's what my dad does. So now that I'm homeschooling, 10-year-old girl, 7-year-old boy, 4-year-old girl, I wonder if I have a tendency to withhold help out of fear that I'm pushing them, that I'm doing it for them. I'm taking the fun out of the experience by not letting them free think, etc. But sometimes I might take whining for being tired or not wanting to do something hard. I know this might be a loaded question, but I appreciate any insights your team can provide.
I do think that she hit on an interesting point. Children do get tired. Mm-hmm. We get tired.
Yes.
We probably forget that by nature, their ability to concentrate on something is far less than ours. Mm-hmm. And there's a particular phenomena in attentiveness that I have observed. I noticed this way back when I was coaching parents on practicing violin with kids. And that is when you start something, it's kind of going well and it gets better and there's engagement level and it's very high. And then at a certain point, it peaks out. But it isn't a gradual downslope. It is a cliff drop. When a child has reached the peak capacity for attentiveness and they are done, they are done. And they will just need to be done. Whereas what a lot of us as parents, what we like to do is milk it for all it's worth, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's going so well. Mm-hmm. Let's just go a little bit more. Let's try a little further. How about this one more thing? So you're trying to push up the curve, and the kid is all the way halfway down to the complete bottom.
Yep.
So my coaching for parents, particularly in violin practice with, children that age and younger, is stop anywhere before the top of the curve.
Yes.
Stop anywhere before the peak of attentiveness and say, okay, we're done for the day or we're done for now. And the child's like, oh, okay. And there's that feeling of like, wow, I could have done more. Mm-hmm. I would have liked to continue, right?
Yep.
But if you stop anywhere after the peak, the after feeling is, that was so exhausting. I hope I don't have to do that again anytime soon. So definitely shortening the time, especially, her statement that maybe the whining is connected with tiredness. Oftentimes, I have found if you kind of kick it back on the kid and say, oh, so this is hard for you right now? Let's take a break.
Exactly.
You tell me when you want to come back to this, and I'll be here for you.
Yep.
But, her question points toward another thing, which I have mentioned, and that is we do have to discern the difference between helping and meddling, right? So helping is when you respond to a student who indicates in some form, either explicitly or implicitly, I need help to finish this. I need help to be able to accomplish this. I need help to be able to understand this. Meddling is when we go and try to push the thing and say, well, let me explain this a little bit more for you. Or let me give you more suggestions.
Let me write a paper or do a science fair project for you.
And children get allergic to that, right? And so if they feel like you are interfering with their freedom to do something, then there will be resistance. There will be some form of communicating that.
Right.
So it's not an easy question to answer because the wisdom is in the balance. But, I think that's the general two best guidelines I can give is helping is when you perceive that a child would need the help to be successful. And if they're not, then just let it go. Let them try. And maybe they'll do it or maybe they won't. But give the opportunity. Then if you discover that they were not successful or had errors or didn't understand something, don't do the ex post facto teaching, which is to right then and there say, well, this is what you didn't do as you should have, and here's what you should have done. No. Drop it, come back the next day or the next week, and then teach at that point of need, represent the concept as kind of a fresh idea, and let them try it out again.
Yep. Okay. Amanda, I hope that helps. Okay, our last question is such a great question that we actually sent it to you. You responded directly to the questioner, and then we took most of your answer and changed the name to protect the innocent. But this has to do with motivation and contrived relevancy. And this parent was using video games as a way to reward her son for doing his work.
Yeah,
and it got to the
that.
point where he was just saying, well, kind of like what you said in the motivation talk, I don't want to do it. The punishment is better than failing. So can you just speak
Well,
to...
if I recall, this was a very young child, 8.5 years old, if I'm correct. And the deal was if you do your schoolwork without getting counted 1, 2, 3 for the day, you get 20 minutes of video games, which in itself would send up maybe a red flag, but isn't the biggest problem that I perceived because she went on to point out that it had got now to where he wouldn't do anything without the video game reward.
Right.
And he was actually moving into extortion, right?
Right.
And as she put it, and I thought this was very linguistically advanced for a child of that age, I won't even consider it unless video games are on the table.
On the table.
Right?
Right.
So, I wrote to her and I said, well, I think, number one, your child, is very intelligent. He has a great auditory memory. He's picked up on that kind of expression. You probably read to him a lot, so I'm sure you're doing many things right. But I don't know that that is the right form of contrived relevancy.
Video games.
Because of the addictive nature, the instant gratification type of way that it was working, do this now, and immediately after that you get, your video game. And of course, in my imagination, I can extrapolate out how does that continue, how do the negotiations go over the next 5 years? You have a lot of authority and control over the environment of your home for an 8-9-year-old boy.
Yeah.
You have way less authority over the environment and control over a young teenager.
Yep.
And if that pattern holds, that could become very problematic down the line. So my suggestion to her was, yes, I acknowledge the fact that it would be great if kids were motivated out of a desire to learn, motivated to discover the truth in things, kind of these high and lofty philosophical educational ideals. But for a child that age, the truth is what's good for me is that I get what I want, right?
That's true.
So then the art of it becomes figuring out how to create a system where they can get something which they want, but actually is good for them and they believe it. The video game, the child believes it's good for him, but it may not in actuality be good for him.
Right.
And so what I suggested was something that would remove the video games, and I think I used the word cold turkey, just get rid of it for a while. You know, maybe you'll bring it back in, but 8.5 is very young to start feeding that. So just get rid of it out of the house and then replace it with some things, that are going to be enjoyable for him and also good for him. And maybe come up with an economic system where he can earn, points or chips or something. But it's more of a long term. So he has to earn, the chips by following the rules, losing chips by being fined when he breaks the rules, and then having an account from which certain privileges can be, quote, purchased with those points. And those privileges are things that are actually better for the soul. I also suggested that maybe, you get an email like that and you don't know more than you do know about this child and their personality and the dynamic and the family situation and all that.
Sure.
But I got the feeling that maybe the academics was being pushed a little bit too much for a child that young. When you take a young boy and set them down to do reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they get exhausted, and your ideal and their capacity are just disconnected, somewhat like we mentioned before.
Yep.
The parent's expectation may just be unreasonable. And so maybe not just take a break from video games, but take a break from, quote, schoolwork and use that time to do some other things that could accomplish, some word games, some, games that require a little bit of math, like Monopoly or Catan or, something. I think that, we've kind of lost the board game, interactive, physical, doing this thing together and learning from that experience. And we've replaced it with screens. Many times the screen games are just individual, especially at that age, or people that are not even there. So, that was kind of the gist of it. People can read the whole thing I wrote, but I labored over. I took almost over an hour and a half to refine that thing to the point where I was, because I didn't want to come across as being critical.
Right.
And saying, you're a horrible parent for letting your 8.5-year-old child play video games every day.
And I know that's not what you would think.
And that isn't at all what I was saying. I was thinking, okay, if this is where you are and that's where you want to be, what's a possible next step on this path?
Right. Well, and of course, we'll put a link in our show notes to that blog post that Andrew wrote. And I also want to just give a shout out to our friend, Monica Swanson, Boy Mom. Because her recent podcast, she asked her boys this question, and she's got 4 boys, and one is in high school, one's in middle school, elementary, and then 2 are off to college. But she asked them about the video game thing, and her high school student, basically, his answer was, I don't play video games pretty much at all because they're not really valuable. There's no end game to my playing video. I'm not learning anything from it. I'd rather go out and surf. Well, he's a champion surfer, so that's probably why.
Is she the one whose son asked me what car I drive?
Yes, exactly. And that was,
I remember that.
Yeah, so we will link to that podcast, and I think you'll find it. And we definitely need to have her back on our show and talk to us about Boy Moms.
Boy Moms.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you, Andrew. I know we went a little long, listeners. I appreciate your patience, but I'm sure that you, like me, gleaned much from listening to Andrew. So I thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcast. Until then, on behalf of Andrew Pudewa and the team at IEW, I thank you for allowing us to partner with you on your journey toward better listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking.